Let us pray. Creator, we just ask that the written word will lead us to the spoken word and help us to live together in your living word. Amen. So, answering the call. It's a message that's in the scripture this morning, and it's one that works well for different reasons. And so I have some stories to tell today because for as long as I can remember, I've had this deep love of stories. And if you look in those little scrapbooks or notebooks that kids wrote in when they were kids, I always said I was going to be an author and an illustrator. And in some ways, maybe I've arrived at that. We're still figuring that out. So why do I love stories? Well, I love the imagination of what's possible and how we can travel when we read. I love fiction. I love exploring new worlds. And if you were to look for me when I was a kid on the dairy farm near Ottawa, as a kid, we were usually tucked under the big maple trees. We had a big blanket, and we would, I don't know if we had a maximum, but we would max out our library cards and just have mountains of books. And my happiest summers were just having lots of time to read and not too much time weeding the vegetable garden. Reading was always my top. So what did I read? Well, library books, of course, borrowed books. Sometimes we had that treat of that school book order. Every once in a while we'd get a book order book. And of course we had lots of stories through church and summer camps as well. Stories from the ancient tradition of the Bible. But even with all those written stories, I still think my favorite was hearing the family stories and the people that made up the history that turns into mine. And the neat thing about stories, too, is that you can tell a story and you can convey truth in it, but it doesn't all have to be fact. But it's also a way to carry a story and a teaching from the past and bring it to the future. And sometimes when we're reading the Bible, we have a hard time making that switch because we haven't done the fishing or mending of nets. But some of those stories have little nuggets that we can bring forward into our own present and have those stories work in our hearts. So when I think about the stories of people I've loved, and I do love, I think about noticing their values, and I look for those surprises of what caught them off guard along the way, and I notice the feelings they convey. And I think the best part about stories is the unexpected. Don't you love hearing the old stories about grandparents or people in your church that you picture them being a little kid and those impish things they got into and the little sneaky attacks that happened and the surprises that they had that show their real sense of humor, that tell you about the person that they were. And in our lives, there's a big difference between just doing the job or just doing the task and making it a calling, or sometimes taking the time to notice and find the calling. There's a difference between just going through the motions and putting the heart into it. And I think a lot of that is the difference between finding a purpose and seeing the light, like the song just said, seeing a light in other people and finding a way to spread that further into the world. And a word we don't often use in tasks beyond being the minister is when we put our hearts and our intention for the betterment of our world with the people that we meet. All those things we're doing, that's all different kinds of ministry, whether we hold that title or not. We're all ministers in some way. So I think we have a slide about the boat, the call on the boat. So what we're seeing when we see this story is a pretty major call that happens of these unassuming men who were going about their daily work, doing the fishing work, and Jesus may have been having a lot of conversations with them leading up to this, maybe sharing some meals, maybe some late night campfire conversations with these fishermen, trying to suss them out and see what they were about. So he felt like Simon and Andrew and James and John, they were showing some kind of a spark and potential for a calling that Jesus had in mind for the mission he was working on, this traveling and telling the stories that God was telling him to do. So he saw this divine spark in them, but here they are doing this work they've been raised in. That's all they know. It's kind of similar to the farming life that I know. It's something that you're steeped in for traditions. First, it goes generations deep. It's all-consuming. It's tied to one place. It's pretty hard to leave. And it doesn't allow the kind of time and commitment and freedom that these men would have needed. They wouldn't have been able to really do both. So they had a call, and they had to decide how they were going to answer. And when I think about the kind of people that answer a call, I think about how excited I get to be around somebody who just loves what they do, and they make meaning with whatever it is they do. I think it's a combination of magic and ministry. You can tell by how they light up when they explain the intricacies of their field and how the widget and the what's it and the do-dinger, how they all do their magic. I love watching that. I'll never understand it, but I love it. And people have these moments in their own callings, and so I was thinking about some examples that come to mind in our community. And the one I love is talking with people who take care of patients, say with dementia, and the kind of care and attention they can put in so that they can have those moments of magic in their ministry and light up that person's day with just the right song that helps them have a beautiful day when they can be back in the memories that they hold dear. And the other one that I read about a lot is the people who work with the parents and work with the students who live with autism. And some of them are locked into these brilliant brains without the ability to communicate, but sometimes just the right spark and just the right nudges, and the people can help unlock those words. And it's so much celebration when those first words come out, that there's finally a connection between the other humans in their lives. And I picture our friend, a custodian down the road who works at our school. You know, this might not be his dream job, but he's providing for the family he dreamed of. And he takes notice of even the loneliest kids at the school and brings them a smile and brings love and humor into their days. And it's doing any of these tasks with care and intention that I think is answering Spirit's call. And of course, during pandemic times, we're noticing all different kinds of calls going out and all different kinds of calls being answered. And so this beautiful person came to mind this week, Anne-Marie. So Anne-Marie, you wouldn't know from the picture, she's got a sticky note stuck on her head. This is Dr. Anne-Marie Zaidlik in Guelph. And you have to, if you're on Facebook, you have to look up Dr. Anne-Marie. She is a doctor, and she's specializing right now in COVID. She also works in HIV specialties. But she could do that. That's a lot of work on its own. But what she's doing now is she's created this whole new ministry with her Facebook posts. And in these posts, she writes the warnings. She writes with honesty. She has the reassurances saying, we're going to get through this, but she always adds a bit of humor and humility. So on this day, she was saying, you've got to excuse me. We're overwhelmed. We're exhausted. I'm overwhelmed with sticky notes, and my office is full of things to do. But she was saying, don't forget, we're still doing this together, and we have to take care of our spirits. And she talked about taking time for self-care, that meditation, that prayer, that reaching out, not just the science, but she's putting so much heart into it. And that's where I see she's going from beyond the task to adding that extra heart and passion, and she's answering that call. So thanks for Anne-Marie. We don't have to move on yet, Eric. And of course, I can't help but notice when I spend time with or hear about, I mean, everything's distant now, but the folks that make up these church communities of Mount Zion and Trinity, when I think about the summer, and it would have been really simple for Mount Zion to just say, okay, we have someone to cut the lawn, we're just going to keep cutting the lawn. And it would have been simple and straightforward just to do that and lock everything else down. But they continue to offer the garden space. And it's such a simple act, but the intention allows the neighborhood to come in. It allowed people to have space and food and fellowship in a time when space was so dearly needed. And it's such a simple gift, but that intention has created an extra ministry at a time when it's very hard to reach people in the community. And as well with Trinity, I mean, this place, I'm told, is normally bustling, and it's empty so much, but it's not just the building, right? But when I see the kind of care and attention everyone put into how we were going to transition the hospitality meals from the building to bringing them out in the community, it's just amazing. Because, again, it would have been pretty straightforward to say, we can't do it, it's too hard, and we're going to close the door. We can't have Alcoholics Anonymous meeting here. We can't do hospitality meals. But Spirit keeps moving, and people keep finding a way. And I think that's the step between just doing the task of keeping the church status, but also now growing it and keeping the Spirit alive for folks who very badly need it right now. And now there's a slide about the inauguration. So I haven't seen all the footage yet, but I read enough to know that it was very remarkable. And we know that President Biden is not our leader, but as you know, with having such a large and influential neighbor, it matters a lot to us what the tone and decisions are of the people who lead the country just south of us. So I'm really relieved to hear that there's a measured approach and that he and his team have a wide understanding of humanity, of our struggles and the iniquities that exist, and of what the kingdom can look like if only we all act together with unity and intention, and more importantly, how he's trying to model that leading with love and care. He's not a young man, and life has not been easy. He's had many losses in his family, and don't you think at this point it'd be really easy for him to just retire someplace warm and enjoy the beach and enjoy the view? But he hasn't done that, and I think there's a good reason for that. I think he's got a calling to be this transition person, to bring about some more human changes to that country, and I hope in the transition time also to ours. But what I also notice is the care and attention that he and his team are putting into the beginning of all this, and that inauguration and what it represented. Because you were just blown away to see the kinds of things they considered, the representation, the gender spectrum, the expansive and inclusive loving language, and even the clothing worn. I've seen a picture that shows the people that were walking on the carpet. They represented all colors of the rainbow in the clothing they were wearing. And I think all those are really good signs of them all taking the call together. And if anyone needs just one thing to watch, this is the one thing I did watch the entire thing, and I'm going to be watching it over and over again. This young woman, this poet, Amanda Gorman, and we who appreciate music and fellowship and worship, we know that it's important to come together, and we shouldn't be surprised that poetry can have this power. But when you listen to the words she's spoken, she speaks about a nation that isn't broken but simply unfinished, that we can rebuild and reconcile and recover. And all these things sound familiar for us who know some of these words of hope from our faith. She speaks about the people who are diverse and beautiful, that they can emerge, while battered, also beautiful. And of course, her beautiful finish. The new dawn blooms as we free it, for there is always light. If only we're brave enough to see it, if only we're brave enough to be it. And I just love that moment that brought millions of people together while her words were able to minister to people in a time they needed it so badly. We're all blessed because she is using her gifts and she was able to take that call. And now we have a slide, a little bit about my story. So I found a picture last night of my Nana. My Nana's in the front, and this is the last time that we had Nana at a family reunion back at my parents' farm. And I would have been around 18 or 19 at the time, and she was around 90. And we got her out of the nursing home for a visit and some conversation, and I think maybe even a gin and wink with the family. That was our family treat. So around Christmas of that year, I had my last visit with Nana in her nursing home. And I knew, even though I hadn't experienced much of this before, I knew I would not see her again. I was going back to university, and I just knew she was failing and fading, and I didn't know what to say. I'd never encountered the way you converse with somebody when you know they're going. I didn't know how to do that. But what I did know how to do was tell her story. And so in the weeks that came, as I just pictured her earthly life ebbing away and her preparing to meet her long deceased husband in heaven, I kept having images come to me. And I thought about the double white lilac bush that was on our farm that we'd taken a slip of from her farm. And I thought about her raising those kids all on her own because my great-grandfather died very young, and how she navigated nursing and parenting and farming, all in a time when not a lot of women did that on their own. So when the time came for her funeral, I don't remember how I decided, but I asked if I could deliver her eulogy. And so as I carried the Bible to the van, this was the Bible that the nursing home, or the hospital and the funeral home would give one to the family. So I had that family Bible in my hand to read the verses she had picked and had written out. I went to the family van and I went to get in, and my dad said, "Oh, you look a lot like a minister, Janine." And I didn't take a lot of notice, I just kind of smiled and I dismissed that for about, 20 years, give or take. And honestly, since then, I've delivered many family eulogies in our family tree, and even since arriving here, I just love the gift of having time with people to help them pull together what was important about their loved ones and what their faith story meant and what they imagine they can continue honoring and remembering when their loved people have died and gone on. So I don't know yet where all this ministry is going to lead me, but being called to tell people's faith stories and making meaning of our stories is definitely one thing that is filling my bucket, and I just love being that author that can do that. I have another blast from the past there. So this is a little tiny student card. It doesn't really matter if you can read the fine print. It says Janine Fraser, so that's me, and that's my first university card from the University of Guelph. And please do not ask why I still have a card from 1990, whatever, in my drawer. I knew how to find it. But it's this little story from the past, and it's part of my story is being there at the University of Guelph and studying international development. I really wanted to study within the fields of the humanities, but also agriculture. And so it was a perfect place for me to land. And it doesn't matter a lot about the coursework I took at the time. There was history, politics, farming, all those good things. But what you should know about me at that time is I was definitely a type A student, and I wanted to get things done, and I wanted to do them right. And I was telling Paul this week, I still can't believe that I was so naive. When I was that age, I thought, group work is such a pain. People do not do their jobs, and when I get into the working world, I'm just going to fire everyone who doesn't do their job. And I have been working for so many years, and I have not yet ever fired a single person. So you never know how that's going to go. And now, Paul points out too, that if I'm in ministry, I'm actually in a role where the people can fire me. So I don't know if I'm winning here or not. Anyway, take that for what it is. So in the in-between years, of course, I've helped with church committees and Sunday schools and events, and leading worship kind of kept popping up here and there. And I was also working with the Ontario Federation of Agriculture, which I continue to do right now, as a resource person for farmers, and now I work on a lot of leading and training and programming for our provincial group of farmers. But during that time, we had a big car crash, and I decided I had to make some changes to move ahead with some of the things I was feeling called to do. So I took a leap, and a friend of mine heard the story and said, if you wanted something different, you could have just gone and taken a yoga class. But I didn't take a yoga class. I took my master's in divinity, and I just wanted more learning and writing, understanding our Christian story and understanding other faiths and how their stories inform their lives. There was lots of questioning, and for me there still is, but I'm so grateful I took the call for that chapter of my life. And there's one more slide, I think. So this one says winter wellness, and this brings me to the kind of ministry that I get to do in my other job with the Federation, with what I call my farmers. So my 38,000 farmers are my other congregation, and I've gotten a really strong interest in mental health for farmers. And so over the past few years, we've had a lot of people who've had struggles, and in my family and in the farm communities, and it left me wanting to do more. So I don't know if people realize this, but farm types, even less than the regular population, farmers don't tend to seek help when they're struggling with what's happening in their minds. So there's a lot of shame attached to it. They want to work through everything on their own. And so there's lots of need for understanding and conversation in this part of the sector. And we're finding through some research that farmers have a higher incidence of burnout and stress and anxiety and depression, which is very common for people who are entrepreneurs and also for people who are more isolated from communities out in the country. We live where we work. They tend to overwork. There's lots of money pressures, and the markets and the weather that we depend on are not in our control. So there's a lot of things that are scary and stressful about being a farmer, even though farmers always claim to love it. And we also don't see farmers represented well in mental health campaigns, so they don't see themselves in the picture, and they don't picture themselves being treated appropriately by a mental health professional. So for about the 5 or 6 years past that have gone before us, I've been working on committees, and we've taken all these steps, and we've done the research with the academics, and we've tried to organize this workshop program that will help translate mental health language to farm communities so that they'll understand what they can do to help their neighbors and help people find the right resources, sort of pastoral care for the farm community. And there were so many times that we just were not getting anywhere, and it felt like we'd wasted so much time on all this committee work and all these stakeholders getting together. But about 3 years ago, a dear friend of mine that I used to work with, she had a lot of struggles, and unfortunately, they got so great that she ended up taking her own life. And she was a member of a farm family, and it devastated just thousands of people that this young mom had been so overwhelmed that she couldn't face the future and she couldn't face another day. And so whenever I thought I wanted to give up, I'd remember her saying to me, "Janine, you're going to do more, right?" And so I did, with help, and we kept reporting and we kept connecting the dots, and this summer we finally found the right partners and the right money. And I guess there's some timing here in how mystery works, because this week I'm about halfway through my placement here in ministry, and we finally got to announce that we're launching this In the Know mental health campaign to educate the farm communities all across Ontario and Manitoba, and more provinces coming. The suffering of our fellow farmers and friends kept us wanting to do more, and I'm so glad we answered. So what I do with the farm community compared to here may not be described by ministry by everyone, but I do think it feels like it. So when we picture that group of young men fishing, which some of us can't picture very readily, what we can remember is that they were about to become followers and disciples. We can remember that. And we can picture that they already had a good and predictable life, but Jesus saw some special spark in those souls he was working with at that time. And he knew they could be part of a bigger story, to take on the challenge in front of them and to learn how to teach and care for the wider world with a heart and the intention that God was willing. If only they could leave behind the comfort of what they'd always known to become part of this entire Jesus story. And they did. Jesus asked them, and so too asks us, "Will you come and follow me if I but call your name?" May we all, in our own way, find our own way to answering that call. Amen.